Hey guys, I'm T and welcome to the channel. If you're new here, we make trendy and fun crochet tutorials twice a week. And if you haven't already, smash that like button, drop a comment down below, and subscribe to join in on the fun. Today I'll be teaching you how to make a modern off-the-shoulder top. This modern marvel falls in that cozy spot between off-the-shoulder and tee. It features the Trinity Stitch for texture and is super comfy to wear. Speaking of, if you're looking for something comfy to wear or crochet, you're in the right place. We have hundreds of modern crochet patterns for everyone to enjoy, with many more on the way, so consider clicking the bell to subscribe and you'll never miss an upload. Also, do me a huge favor and give this video a big thumbs up if you like it, or 2 thumbs down if you don't. Either way, it's a great way to show support so I can keep putting out free tutorials every Wednesday and Sunday. Now, it's time to get on the show, so without further ado. For this project, any category 4 yarn will work, but I used a total of 300 grams of yarn, and that's 450 yards if you're stateside. As for tools, a 5mm hook, scissors, stitch markers, and a tape measure. There is a written pattern down below. Use offer code TCDDIY for a discount off any $9.99 plus order, and enter this week's pattern giveaway by telling us if you can cosplay as anyone. Who would it be? For me, there's actually quite a few, but just off the top of my head, it would have to be Songo from Inuyasha or Darla from Finding Nemo. Details for the giveaway down below. We're using 5 stitches for this project, and will be as follows. Chain, slip stitch, single crochet, half double crochet, double crochet, and Trinity Stitch. This tutorial is for a size small, but you can adjust it to your size, and we explain how to in the video, so let's get started. Getting this top started, we're all going to grab our category 4 yarn and make a slip knot. Next, we're all going to grab our 5mm hook, and we're going to get started on our shoulder band. So we're all going to get started by making a chain the height that we'd like for our shoulder band to be. I'd like for mine to be about 2.5 inches or 7 centimeters, so I'm going to start by making a chain 12. Now that we have our chain, we're going to block off that last chain and do a chain 3. That doesn't count as a stitch, that's just our turning chain. And now we're going to put 1 double crochet into every chain. So yarn over, into that chain that we blocked off with a 4th chain from our hook, insert with a double crochet. Yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. The next one, yarn over, into that following chain, pull through 2, pull through 2, and put 1 double crochet into every chain. Our row 1 is finished. Our following rows for our shoulder band are going to be back loop double crochet rows, so to get that started, chain 3, and flip rework. Yarn over, and find the last stitch from our previous row, insert in through that back loop, or the loop that's furthest away from you, and then double crochet per usual. Again, yarn over, into that following stitch's back loop with a double crochet. Continue putting 1 back loop double crochet into every stitch. At the end of the row, chain 3, flip our work, and then repeat. We're going to continue on with this row with no increases and no decreases until we get a shoulder band that can stretch around the widest part of our shoulders, and I will meet you back right after we end on an even number. My shoulder band is all finished. I have a total of 58 rows, and my length is 31.5 inches or 77 centimeters unstretched. Now we're going to seam it together. So let's all make sure that our band is not twisted, and then we're going to insert our hook into the corner stitch of both the front and the back panel. We're going to yarn over, pull through everything on our hook, and do a chain up of 1 to secure, and now let's do our single crochet seam. Find that first stitch into the front panel and insert in through that stitch. Next stitch into the back panel, insert your hook in through that stitch. And then single crochet around everything. Let's do this again. Into that following stitch into the front panel, insert, following stitch into the back panel, insert, and single crochet. And continue this until we don't have any more stitches left, and then do a chain up 1 and cut. So now that everything is seamed, we're going to need to separate our front and our back panel. So let's all start by making sure that our work is flipped right side out, meaning the seam that we did is along the inside. So getting started on our back panel first, we're going to make sure that we're placing our seam in the middle of our back, and we're going to be placing our stitch markers into the stitches that we have right where the corner of our underarms are. And we want to make sure that we're placing our stitch markers not in our side row, but in between 2 of our side rows right where the corner of our underarm is. So if you guys have my numbers, counting from my seam, I inserted my stitch marker in between the 10th and the 11th row, and I did the same thing on the other side because I want my seam to be centered. Now from here, we're going to do the same thing along the front, so making sure that this is still on us, we're going to insert our stitch markers into the corner of our underarm along the front of our body now. And still remembering to insert our stitch markers in between 2 side rows and not into the entirety of our side row. So for those of you that want my numbers as well, from the first stitch markers that we did over to the front of my body, I inserted my stitch marker in between the 9th and 10th side row, and that's right where the front of the corner of my underarm is, and I did the same thing on the other side. Now from here, this might need some adjusting, but from my front panel underarm stitch marker stitch all the way over to my other one, I have a total of 20 rows. We want our front and our back panel to have the same amount of rows. So since mine are the same, I'm going to get started with my prep row for my front and back panel. But if your numbers are just a little off, go ahead and place your stitch markers into any stitch that we need. We just want to make sure that the front and back panel have the same amount of rows, and then our armholes have the same amount of rows as well. So preparing for our front and back panel, we're all going to single crochet from stitch marker to stitch marker for the front and the back panel, not for the underarm. We're all going to insert our hook into that side row that we have inserted our stitch marker into, as you guys can see. This is my little in-between stitch that my stitch marker's in. I'm going to insert my hook in through there, insert my yarn onto my hook, and pull through. Now working towards my following stitch marker, we're going to be putting 2 single crochets into every side row. So do a chain up of 1 to secure, and working towards my next stitch marker, find your following side row, insert your hook in through there, and then single crochet once. Into that same side row, another single crochet. And that's that. Let's do that again. Into that following side row, insert with your first single crochet, and then into that same with your second single crochet. And continue this until you reach our stitch marker. When we do a chain up of 1 and cut, and then repeat everything on the other side. So our single crochet prep row for the front and the back panel are finished. We're now going to set our shoulder band off to the side, and we're going to get started on our front panel's underarm. Now for our front and back panel, we're going to be doing our Trinity stitch. So let's all start by making an odd number chain that reaches from about 1 inch underneath our underarm down to where our waist is, keeping in mind that we will have a bottom band. I need a total of 7.5 inches or 19 centimeters, so I'm going to start by making a chain of 31. Now that we have our chain, we're going to get started with our Trinity stitch. So to do the first Trinity stitch of every row, we're going to start with a single crochet. So block off that last chain and do a chain 1. That doesn't count as a stitch, that's our turning chain. And then into that chain that we blocked off, or the second chain from our hook, single crochet into there. So insert, pull through, and pull through 2. We're now going to insert our hook into that same chain that our single crochet is in. So insert, and then we're going to pull up a loop because we ultimately want 4. So yarn over, pull up for 2 loops on our hook. Into each of the following 2 chains, pull up a loop into each of those as well. Into that following chain, pull through for 3 loops. Into that following chain, pull through for 4 loops on our hook. Now that we have those 4 loops, we're going to yarn over, pull through all 4, and then to finish off our Trinity stitch, chain 1. That's going to be how we do our first Trinity stitch for every row. Now let's get started on the following Trinity stitch. We're going to start by inserting our hook into that last stitch that our previous Trinity stitch was worked into. So this is that stitch for me. Insert and pull through. We want to have a total of 4 loops on our hook again, so into each of the next 2 loops as well, we're going to pull up a loop. So insert, pull through for 3, and then insert, pull through for 4. Yarn over, pull through all 4, and then finish up this Trinity stitch with a chain 1. Now it's going to be a repeat of this, making our way all the way down. So let's do this again. Let's start by inserting our hook into the last stitch that our previous Trinity stitch was worked into. Pull through into that following chain, pull through, and then into that following chain and pull through. Yarn over, pull through all 4, and then chain 1. Let's do one more, just a little bit quicker. Into that same last chain that our previous Trinity stitch was worked into, pull through, into that following, pull through, and into that following, and pull through, yarn over, pull through all 4, and then chain 1 to finish it off. Continue doing our Trinity stitch until we have 2 stitches left. We've done our Trinity stitch and we've made our way all the way down until we have 2 chains left. Now we're going to do our last one together. This last Trinity stitch is going to start off the same way that all of our other ones have. So into the last stitch that our previous Trinity stitch is worked into that following chain, so that's second to last, and then into that following chain, so our last, yarn over, pull through all 4, and then for the last Trinity stitch, we're not going to do a chain 1, we're going to single crochet into that same last chain that our previous Trinity stitch was worked into. So in through there, insert, with a single crochet. But since we're at the end of our odd number row, we're going to be doing an increase as well. So right after that single crochet, which is per usual, we're also going to do a half double and a double crochet into that same last chain. So yarn over, into that same stitch with a half double, and then into that same stitch once more with a double crochet. Now we're only going to be increasing like this at the end of every odd number row. So getting started on our row 2, we're going to chain 1, flip our work, and do our Trinity stitch all the way down. No increases and no decreases. So let's do the first one together. The first one is always going to start off with a single crochet into the last stitch from our previous row. Next, we're going to insert our hook into that same stitch that our single crochet is in, pull through, and then into each of the following 2 stitches, pull up a loop into those, because we need a total of 4 loops on our hook. Then yarn over, pull through all 4, chain 1 to close it off. Now let's do our following Trinity stitch. Inserting our hook into that last stitch that our previous Trinity stitch is worked into, pull through, into that following, pull through, and then into that following, pull through, yarn over, pull through all 4 of those loops, chain 1. Continue doing this Trinity stitch until we have 2 stitches left, just so we can close off this row together. I'm nearly finished with my row 2. I have 2 stitches left, so now we're going to do our last Trinity stitch. So it's going to start off the same as all of our other ones, inserting your hook into the last stitch that our previous Trinity stitch is worked into, pull up a loop, into that second to last, pull up a loop, and then into that last, pull up a loop. Yarn over, pull through all 4 of those loops. Since we're at the end of our even number row, we're just going to single crochet into that last stitch from our previous row. And that is how we're going to close off each of our even number rows. From here, chain 1, flip our work, and we're now going to repeat rows 1 and 2. So do our Trinity stitch, making our way all the way down, and I'll remind you at the end of this row how we're going to do our increase just once more. We are at the end of our row 3, so let's do our increase together. Start our last Trinity stitch off the same way that we have been doing all of the other ones, so we need ultimately 4 loops on our hook, yarn over, pull through all 4, and then into that last stitch, a single, a half double, and then a double crochet. And that is going to be how we end all of our odd number rows. Now from here, we're going to repeat our rows 2 and 3 until we have an underarm portion that can stretch from mid-underarm over to the corner of our underarm, making sure that we end on the increase end or right after an odd number row. Now this is actually the size that I need. This is just about 2 inches or 5 centimeters. And a really quick tip, this design was designed to be fitted, but if you would like a slouchier fit for the body, feel free to add more rows to the underarm portion to get the fit that you'd like. So what we're going to do from here is make an even number chain that reaches up to the bottom of our shoulder band. I need a total of 2 inches or 5 centimeters, so I'm going to start by making chain 6. And now that we have our chain, we can reintroduce our shoulder band to connect it. So what we're going to do from here is work into that single crochet prep row that we made to prep for our front and our back panel. We're going to pick one of our sides. I picked the front panel. Insert your hook into the corner stitch of that first stitch, and then we're going to yarn over, pull through everything to connect it, and now our underarm portion is connected to our shoulder band, and now we're going to work our way up to the following row by slip stitching into that next stitch into the base. So this is my following stitch into the base. I'm going to insert my hook, yarn over, pull through everything, and then work my way down my chain with our Trinity Stitch. Now for the body portion, we aren't going to have any increases or decreases along the top or the bottom. So do this Trinity Stitch row with no increases and no decreases. At the end of the row, chain 1, flip our work, and then Trinity Stitch all the way back. I'll meet you back at the base. So my first and second Trinity Stitch row is all finished for my body portion. Now we're going to connect it into the base once more. Into that next available stitch, insert your hook into that stitch with a slip stitch. That closes off our second body row. To work our way up to the following row, just slip stitch into that next stitch, flip our work, and then repeat. Continue to do our Trinity Stitch, making our way all the way down until we don't have any more stitches left to work into the prep for our shoulder portion. And I'll meet you back to finish up our underarm, and as a quick tip, we should all end along the bottom since we should have an even number of stitches for the prep. I've just worked my way across my front panel, and I have reached my other stitch marker stitch. Now we're going to do our second underarm. First things first, we're going to need to insert our stitch marker into the same amount of chains that we made that led up to our shoulder band. If you have my numbers, I made a total chain of 6. So counting from the top, I inserted my stitch marker into the 6th stitch. Now from here, since we all should be along the bottom, we're going to do our Trinity Stitch, making our way all the way up until we have 2 stitches left right before our stitch marker stitch, and then also into that last Trinity Stitch. Don't do a single crochet. So we're just going to pull through 4, and then I'll meet you back. We have done our Trinity Stitch all the way down. We have 1, 2 stitches right before our stitch marker stitch, and then into that Trinity Stitch, we did not do a single crochet or chain 1, however we would typically close off this Trinity Stitch. We just pulled through all 4. From here, we're going to do a decrease of 2 single crochets into that second to last and into that last stitch. So right after we pull through all 4, into that following stitch, pull through, into that following stitch, pull through, yarn over, pull through all 3. And that's how we're going to close off this row. Our following row is going to be a Trinity Stitch with no increases and no decreases. So chain 1, flip our work, and then do our Trinity Stitch, making our way all the way down. At the end of the row, chain 1 and flip your work and do our Trinity Stitch all the way back up, leaving 2 stitches again, just so we can decrease together once more. We've made our way down with our Trinity Stitch row and then back up and left the last 2 stitches. And with that last Trinity Stitch that we just did, we didn't do a chain 1 or a single crochet. We just pulled through all 4 stitches, and now we're going to do our decrease once more. So inserting our hook into that second to last stitch, pull through, and then also into that last stitch, pull through, yarn over, pull through all 3. From here, we're going to continue to repeat our 2 previous rows until we have the same amount of underarm rows that we started this piece off with. Since I just had 3, I am all done. So I will be doing a chain up of 1 and cut. After my chain up of 1 and cut, the entirety of my front panel is finished. From here, we're going to repeat the same thing we just did here for the back panel. So get that finished up and then I'll meet you back to seam it all together. Now that both of our front and back panel are finished, we're now going to seam the sides. So first things first, make sure that our work is flipped wrong side out, and then we're going to insert our hook into the bottom corner stitch of both the front and the back panel. Insert your yarn onto your hook, pull through, and then do a chain up of 1 to secure. And now to do our single crochet seam, which is the same seam that we did for our shoulder band, inserting our hook into that first stitch into the front panel, and then into that next stitch into the back panel, and then single crochet them together. Let's do this once more. Next stitch into the front panel, next stitch into the back panel, and then single crochet. And that's it. Continue this until we don't have any more stitches left. When we don't, do a chain up of 1 and cut, and then repeat on the other side. So now that our sides are all seamed up, we're going to get started on our bottom band. So first things first, let's make sure that our work is flipped right side out, meaning all of the seams are now along the inside, and then we're going to insert our hook into any one of the side rows that we have along the bottom. Next, we're going to insert our yarn onto our hook, pull through, do a chain up of 1 to secure, and now we're going to put 1 single crochet into every side row. So start by finding our first side row, which this is mine right here. We're going to find that top loop and insert your hook and single crochet once. Let's find our following side row, which this is mine right here. Find that top loop as well, and then single crochet. That's basically it. Just put 1 single crochet into every side row and then slip stitch into that chain space when we make our way all the way around. And a really quick tip, this single crochet row is going to be as wide as this piece can stretch. So once we're done with this row, after we do our slip stitch, try this piece on and make sure that it fits well. If it's a little bit too tight, reduce some stitches with a looser grip, or if it's a little too tight, reduce some stitches with a looser grip. Now that our single crochet row is finished, we're now going to get started on the length of our bottom band. So right after our slip stitch, we're all going to start by making a chain the length that we'd like for our bottom band to be. Now I'd like for mine to be about 2 inches or 5 centimeters, so I'm going to start by making chain 6. Right after our chain, we're going to block off that last chain, do a chain 1, and then into that chain that we blocked off, or the second chain from our hook, insert with a slip stitch. So insert, yarn over, pull through everything on our hook. Again, into that following chain, yarn over, pull through everything. And continue putting 1 slip stitch into every chain, and a quick tip, make sure that you're not tugging too tightly after every stitch, otherwise the following row could be too tight to work into. Now that we're at the base, we're going to slip stitch it into the base. So find that next available stitch, insert your hook, slip stitch it into there to connect our row 1. Then to work our way up to the following row, slip stitch into that next stitch into the base, and flip your work. From here, put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. So start by finding the last stitch from our previous row, and insert into that back loop, and then again gently yarn over, pull through everything, and continue to put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. At the end of the row, we are going to chain 1, flip our work, and then put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch again, and I'll meet you back at the base. And now that we're back at the base, we're going to slip stitch it into that next stitch. So into that next stitch into the base, slip stitch into there to close off our row 3. Then to work our way up to our row 4, slip stitch into that next stitch into the base, flip our work, and then put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. And then that's it. From here, continue to repeat our back loop slip stitch rows with no increases and no decreases, making sure that we're connecting it into the base the same way that we just did. Now when we made our way all the way around, I'll meet you back so that we can seam it. So I have made my way all the way around with my back loop slip stitch rows. You don't have any more stitches left to work into the base, so now we're going to do an outside loop slip stitch seam. So this seam is going to look like another back loop slip stitch row, so let's all make sure that our work is flipped right side out. We're going to insert our hook into the corner stitch of both the front and the back panel, yarn over, pull through, do a chain up of 1 to secure. Now to do our first seam, we're going to find that first stitch into the front panel and insert only in through that front loop. And then we're going to find that next stitch into the back panel and insert only into that back loop. And then we're going to yarn over, pull through all 3 loops. Let's do that again. Into the first stitch into the front panel, insert only into that front loop, into that next stitch into the back panel, insert only into that back loop, yarn over, pull through all 3. And continue to do this until we don't have any more stitches left to work into. When we don't, do a chain of a 1 and cut. Now that our bottom band is seamed, we're going to clean up our armhole. So what we're going to do is make sure that our work is flipped right side out, right side up, and then we're going to be inserting our hook into that same stitch that our front panel is worked into the shoulder band, and then we're going to single crochet down. So insert your yarn onto your hook, pull through, do a chain up of 1 to secure, and we're going to put 1 single crochet into every stitch, and then once we reach the underarm portion, down here, 1 single crochet into every side row. We're going to continue to do this, making our way all the way up, and then when we don't have any more stitches left to work into, slip stitch into that same stitch that our back panel is worked into the shoulder, and then do a chain up of 1 and cut, and then repeat on the other side. Now that we have cleaned up our armholes, we are all done. Last thing we're going to have to do is weave in all of our ends. And there you have it. Hope you guys enjoyed the tutorial. Join us on Instagram, Pinterest, or Twitter. Those links are down below. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Catch you on the next one. Bye!